Welcome back to A Dummy Explains Hunt Lore for Dummies. Today I am covering the second half of the Tide trilogy and its epilogue. Now I recommend watching the previous video if you haven't, because if you don't know the first half of this lore, this is going to make absolutely no sense. I've covered the two events beforehand and I set up the major players, and now that that's all covered, we can actually get into Tides of Desolation and Desolation's Wake. Now, starting with the Tides of Desolation, we kick over to the Beekeeper, who is a new hunter and one of the main people we follow through this event. She's talking to a fading Charret. Now, he seems to dissipate at the end of the conversation, and it's not exactly confirmed if he's going for good or not, but he's going for the majority of the other events that are present, so we can just count them off for now. It then actually kicks over to the Rat, who's part of the Drown Pact, and they will be one of the major players in the next two events. The Drowned are essentially people who come back from the land of the dead by a witch named Lynch, as we learn later, and they're essentially doing her bidding in an attempt to save their soul. But they sometimes lose control and rip people in half in their alter egos. And it's like literally, by the way, they kind of do it with their hands, not as in like, oh, they ripped them asunder with bullets. The first instance is when Rat and Captain Lafayette, yes, he's back, and they kill people from the Smuggler's Pact. But they only know this because they snap back to themselves holding severed body parts. The story then kicks over to the Beekeeper's daughter, which is where we pick up, and she kind of wants to rid the bio corruption that the dead are spreading, but she's stopped by a man in a well-dressed outfit who's believed to be hardened at the time, but he has a different lore we have to explore in a bit, and asks her to talk to them. Now, she admits disgust for them, which he then proceeds to ask is how her mother felt when she ate the berries grew from her body. She has a weird thing with nature and all that, but we'll cover it as it goes further. It then goes over to the Cow, who is the next pack's leader, which is the Demented, and he's currently killing the Butcher's Cleaver, who was the previous leader of the Demented, because the pack feels they failed him. Now, the Cow explains that they must find the Graving Path, and it's the name for portals that lead to the Land of the Dead, but this one specifically is the one that was at the bottom of King Snake's mine. And just like the bugs and insects, they swarm with purpose instead of just always trying to worship things this time. Now, failure was said to be met with punishment, and it's all he says, really, as he leaves. And the Butcher's Cleaver, big bad antagonist, yeah, he's killed by a bunch of beetles. They swarm on him. Rip that guy, I guess. After the Butcher's death, we cut to the Rat and crew, where the kid, who is one of the drowned people, he talks about how they remember the Land of the Dead so much, and that, they see myths they never knew of, and specifically of a giant mound altar that they will never forget. The Drowned fire a flare and attracts the other packs currently, which is the Grounded, the remaining smugglers, and some of the people from the Death Pack, such as Sophie and Lulu. Now, they tell them of the Graven Path, that the Earth is tainted, and that the Sculptor's influence is growing ever stronger, and that their time is very limited. They explain that they must make pace for the Graven Path, and that it's their only chance to cleanse the Earth of the desolation inflicted upon the Bayou, and that if they don't, they'll slowly be consumed by the ever-growing, gnawing presence of the Sculptor. Meanwhile, the Demented Pack reaches the mine, opens the path, and begins to swarm the lands, specifically aiming for the mound that the kid has mentioned, and it's kind of like part of their plan to reach a final ascension, as they call it. After the Demented have already breached it, the Drowning Company reach the path, realizing it's been breached, and they rush in after. Now, they end up in the middle of a bunch of carnage and these statues that are all been brought into reality by the Murmurstone, and when asked why, the kid states that it's so the Sculptor can understand how they all end, and it's shown that he may not be omnipotent as previously thought. The statues represent the stories of each legend in there, and that's why, he keeps bringing them to reality so they can remember it, and he can also resurrect them through this, but it's just a weird thing we gotta go through later. Now, they reach the Delphine, and they explain this part in the story for those who don't know, and then they board it, except for Captain Lafayette, who gets denied passage because of his previous affliction with it, and how he abandoned it when it was originally in the Land of the Dead. Now, the ship sets off towards the mound itself, and they pass statues of bosses, such as a Civil War vet with no legs, Scrappy, a woman giving birth to the first meathead, which is part of the lore of the first meathead ever born, and then a man weighed down in a watering hole by cannonballs, which is Finch. The Demented, meanwhile, are fighting more and more monstrous creatures as they get closer and closer to the mound, and they swear they were chosen to rule over this place as they tenaciously fight over it, and they say that they may want to rule over the Land of the Dead, which is under a dying moon currently. So this is the kind of weird part. The drowned fight and bash through many of their own monsters, reaching the Rotjaw statue that a woman, Lynch, is sitting on. She's the witch that the drowned were referring to and the one who brought him back. Now, they say that they brought the packs like she asked, and she states the land of the dead's king, and, like, yes, there is a king. He's actually not malevolent. He's kind of, like, neutral. He's anxious that she might win their bet. Now, Finch says the bet was to erase the Bayou's past and to clean his transgressions of sins. And then Lynch tells them that she did her best and channeled all her power into them. And by that, she doesn't mean power. She kind of put all the Bayou's sins in them. More on that later. But she tells them to drain the mound and their drowning will end. They ask her what she gets from this deal, and she tells them that she will have a mouth as wide as a sculptor, and I will learn to hunt as it hunts and take what it cannot. She's very similar to Charest in this respect. It's just a lust for power, essentially. And Lynch is from what's probably the oldest part of Hunt's lore, and I have to go back for that one. Like, I will have to reread that. I know her story, but it's very complicated. It doesn't fit in right now, but I will cover it soon. And the Demented make it to the mound finally, and it turns out the gate is a pair of silver wings from a Goliath beetle, which the beekeeper fires one shot into the mass of immolators, which set the wings on fire and release their hold, releasing ancient shadows, but opening the gate. Now, I do want to make a note here. I keep saying Beekeeper versus Beekeeper's Daughter. They are two different people, two different goals. Beekeeper is part of the Demented Pack. She's not a playable character. The Beekeeper's Daughter, however, learns from her, and she's kind of a neutral force. She's part of the Grounded Pack. Two different people completely. Now, most are struggling to even make it into the nest, but the Delphine, the Drowned, and the Beekeeper who stood alongside the Delphine do make it. They say it goes on for years and decades, and as they're looking all around, there's pupas of the targets growing back, so like Scrappy, Assassin, and all the bosses. And this is kind of how, multiple hunts can keep happening on the same target as they keep coming back. It's because of this. So they keep traveling until they reach an island. Now, the island has all the altars that were sacrificed across all events, and the Beekeeper jumps off the ship where she was stored, and she tastes this black glue coming from the sky. And she says a queen's about to descend. The Drowned are attempting everything to kill it, shooting it, burning it, throwing dynamite, and the Beekeeper keeps commenting that the egg's spiracle is descending, meaning that Desolation's lord was molting. The rat says Lynch lied to them and meant to feed them to this bug, and that's because she channeled all the Bayou's sins in them, not the power like she had originally told him. The sins become a little more important, but I'll explain that in a second. So, the Cap arrives, and after fighting through the Delphine's grudge, he finally gets on board it. He goes to the goddamn burner, stuffs as much dynamite along the ship, lights all the fuses, and he says sayonara as he sends it full steam ahead, and he banishes the boat, which lifts it high into the air, and it rams into the hatchling lord's throat, splitting it asunder and detonating the explosives, ending the desolation. Now, the land spits all those back out into the bayou, and the rat claims the remaining four drown, supposedly hold all the sin of the bayou, and they say that when the shadows come for them, she hopes she can draw the gun fast enough, which ends the lore for the event. Now, to explain the whole sin thing, Lynch puts the sins in them in an attempt to feed them to this molting Goliath beetle, which she wants to use to hunt down the sculptor himself, because again, she wants to be the head honcho. So this was all a play to actually get all the sin to them. And the Drowned now take this job very seriously, and they claim that they will protect the bayou because they were given another chance to live and they won't squander it. So now we can start covering Desolation's wake, which starts off with a train of supplies arriving for Sheriff Harding, who is the lawman's big honcho, as he sees the statesman stepping out of a train. And the statesman is essentially just a hunter who represents the benefactors of the AHA, who pay for the bounties for seemingly unknown reasons, asking Hardin to show him the way to the hunt. We go over to the Grounded, who's now led by Phyllis alongside Lonely Hal, and they are looking for Hardin, claiming that he needs to pay for his complacency during the Desolation event, and claiming that Rotjaw was his discovery. She performs a small little ritual on a slug, and it finds out that he'll be arriving via train, to which then we jump cut over to Sophia, who's the leader of the Death Pack at the bottom of King Snake Mine. Her crew is still the same. It's Reaper, Worm, and Mason from the 2 events ago, and they state that the path is closed for sure, but something still feels off. After a small protection ritual and preparing dynamite, they get out as the tunnels of the mine are shook and collapse, closing off the Grieving Path for good. It then continues as they meet the Brood, a pair of hunters dressed as witch doctors, and they say that Worm is still infected with echoes of the land of the dead. After performing a little ritual, they see a vision of the bayou empty as hunters have fled to the mountain ranges along a red train track line, and that the only one remaining are the Drowned themselves, left to fight the bosses of Hunt as penance and what they call their duty. Now, they meet the drowned banishing the assassin and discuss why they're still doing what they do, and they kind of explain that Lynch is humming, abandoning her personhood, and seeking power, and as long as corruption exists, she can too. And they kind of hint at her sounding distance, which is another hint at the new map that is coming out, and that because it takes place far away from the bayou. There's a ton of those during this event, by the way. They really wanted to keep these little hints for the new map. So it cuts back to Hardin and the Statesman hunting, and Hardin is explaining how he wants order for the swamps when the Statesman asks him why he was defending a town only left with dead. And then the Statesman explains that his benefactors are actually looking for a lawman to lead a slaughtering force on the front lines of what they call their territory. During another hunt, Hardin is hit by a silencer with poison ammo, and the Statesman is kidnapped while he is recovering. Hardin gathers anyone still loyal to the cause of law and order and start capturing, hunting, and interrogating to find out where the Statesman has been hauled off to. He fears that if the next supply train arrives and the Statesman isn't present, that they'd be cut off from the supplies they need to restore order. It's revealed that the Centipede, who's a hunter for the Primal Pack, has captured him. Fellows rips off his potato sack, and he sneers and says they should count their days, to which she responds, "You aren't dead yet, but you could be." And then he asks the Statesman, "Do you want to know why?" Fellows then proceeds to tell the story of Centipede, how she was a demented, whose entire crew was slaughtered by Hardin, who then the Primal took in and started the hunt their way. The Statesman then sneers and asks is that all she wanted to say, to which she says, "We honor our bait as they have a place in the chain, and if their kin can learn lessons from the bait if they survive the bite." It cuts to the death pack and some random primals who are being captured, being fed the Rothschild by Hardin for not cooperating with them. We learn here that Lynch is the person who actually makes the inoculation that all hunters take in the AHA that lets them see in dark sight and the unnatural parts of the world be spotted by them. Hardin then tells these people that they need to help him get the Statesman back because his benefactors supposedly have beaten death at poker one time and that they have all the secrets of the world in their back pockets, maybe even a way to fight off Lynch's influence. Fun fact, they use the bounty tokens you get in-game as poker chips because they just don't think money's fun, I guess. Now, the Primal planned a meeting between Hardin and them for a talk of a truce with the Statesman as leverage. The plan goes wrong because Ironbark actually sells the Primals out and they get Centipede captured. Now, this new train, because they agreed to meet by a train station, but they met them by the train tracks because there's wood and, they're primal, they don't like the machinations of man. The train actually arrives, but the railmen are seen fighting these highs, meaning the train's infected. It stops and releases the dead onto the packs. The packs talk and argue over laws, they fight the dead, and that the hierarchy's always been an issue because if you don't kiss the ring of the lawmen, they tend to, bring down the hammer of the law on you, even though they're supposed to be seen as equals. Now, the Primal says that they want to take the train and ask the other packs if they won't shoot for a truce fire, when a drunk hunter just arrives late and starts shooting, thinking they're in a fight, and it starts another firefight. And Hardin says he'll give them a head start as they make off with the train. During the final part of Wake of Desolation, Hardin's writing a letter to the benefactor saying that the Primal Pact will be acting as his scouts to take the train west, where the new map is, and then when the time comes, he'll need an army to carry out their plan to restore complete order to the lands. The final piece of lore, actually, is when Sophia is writing a train to Lulu, both people, of the Death Pact, that leaving a place is always hard, that leaving the bayou is rending their hearts, but the drowned sword are rid of the scourge that's been plaguing it, and that she has faith in them that they will carry out their duty to the bitter end. They pass by desert, and she says that this death doesn't have passion here, and that they've met death, and this isn't him, as his type still resides in Louisiana. She expresses uneasiness in this new prospect of life in an unknown land with an unknown type of death, but that she'll gladly do it as long as Lulu is there to be back to back with her, cleaning the corruption set loose in the world in hopes of a brighter future. It's very optimistic. It's very unlike Hunt, where we actually see a hunter kind of trying to move on and go to a whole new prospect of life, where they're trying to secure the future rather than just trying to survive. So yeah, that's the entirety of Major Hunt lore right there, in 4 succinct videos. I say knowing that the first one was kind of scuffed. Anyway, the next few videos are going to be probably tips for newer players, personal recommendations on weapons and why I like them the way I like them. Maybe even some gameplay that's going to feature the actual audio to show you differences in gun sounds and why silencers are not as good as people think they are. I know it's a lot of background footage I play, it's just kind of mindless, but I'm just talking about Hunt and lore. I don't want to distract you with a bunch of gun shooty. I do want to circle around back to the deeper lore eventually, where we go in depth with hunter lores, their connections to each person, and maybe even do the original Hunt lore, which was released in an awful way, which is like through Twitter posts. But until then, I'm just going to say bye-bye. I do plan on covering the next event when it comes out, which is the 15th. So look forward to that, I guess.